With the recent release of the Xiaomi 12T Pro, a lot of people set their eyes on the company's first smartphone with a 200 megapixel camera sensor. A lot of people highly anticipated for the company's T series of smartphones too, because it is rather budget friendly yet high in terms of performance. So here's our review of the new Xiaomi 12T Pro. In this video, we'll still be using our usual 6 points when it comes to smartphones, and we are also going to spend more time talking about the cameras because that is the main highlight of this phone. So starting off with the design, I would say that this design is actually looking very good because the back here is made out of a very fine matte finish, and a lot of people have been asking if this is glass or not. I can't confirm, but I have seen some other reviewers saying that it is glass because they asked Xiaomi about it. But from what I can feel, it's pretty solid. It also offers some level of grip, and I mean, it just doesn't slip off my finger, so I think that's good, right? And there's also an included case inside the box if you want to use it as well. The back panel also curves into the frame of the phone, and the screen remains completely flat, and I really love that because that means you can find tempered glass screen protectors a lot easier and apply them without any issues. And now let's talk about the display then. Now, this is the first time Xiaomi is using a brand new name for their type of display called Crystal Res. But what makes it so special? This display is slightly higher than 1080p in terms of resolution. It's a weird 2712 by 1220 pixels in resolution. And while it doesn't seem like a huge increment in terms of resolution over 1080p, it's actually a good upgrade nonetheless, because higher resolution means it's always better, right? And it is also still using a 120Hz refresh rate, so I think that's pretty fine. We also tested the screen using our colorimeter, and the color accuracy is also pretty okay. It covers 99.42% of sRGB and 93.28% of DCI-P3. As for the maximum brightness, it can reach somewhere around 520 nits, which is pretty okay if you want to use it outdoors during a gloomy day. If it's completely sunny, then you have to strain your eyes a bit. My only complaint here though is that the fingerprint scanner is way too low and it is just not ergonomic to use. And before we move into the more serious parts about this phone, I also want to quickly highlight about the battery life of this phone. It's using a 5000 mAh battery and tested at 100 nits of brightness using PC Mark 10 battery life tests. We can get about 12 hours, and while that number doesn't seem like much, I can assure you that the idle battery life is actually a lot better than before, because I can say this with confidence since the Galaxy Z Fold 4 is also powered by the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1. Idle time battery life has been really good. And the Xiaomi 12T Pro also comes with a beefy 120 watts charger inside the box, and I did a total of 3 charging speed tests for this phone just for fun. Now, the first one is by default, so when you unbox this phone, plug it into the 120 watts charger, it will take somewhere around 30 minutes to get to 100% of charge. And then if we head into the settings menu and enable the option called boost charging, then we can actually charge it to 100% in less than 20 minutes, just a little bit less than 20 minutes. And Xiaomi does also list a bunch of warnings in the screen here in the settings menu, so you need to know what you're doing before you actually enable this option. And I should also mention that I got less than 5 data points to map out this entire graph because Xiaomi is doing everything it can to ensure the fastest charging speed that it literally can by just suspending every single app. So it's still quite a miracle that our battery logging app managed to capture some data points for us to plot out this graph. And then the last test I did was to use our Ugreen 100 watt GaN charger to charge this phone. The reason why I did that is because some commenters were saying that the Xiaomi phones support USB PD protocol, and you are right, it does support USB PD, but only up to 20 watts. So it will take about 70 minutes to charge from less than 10% to 100% battery life. And this is what we call a proprietary charging standard. We'll have to use back Xiaomi's own charger and cable to achieve that high charging speed. When Xiaomi eventually excludes their charger from the box, then this is going to be a big problem. Okay, now let's talk about the performance. It is Xiaomi's first ever phone that you can purchase right now that is using the new Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset. The performance that we can get out of this phone is superb, and I absolutely love the gaming experience that I got while playing Genshin Impact at the highest graphical settings at 60 FPS. We did our gaming test, so you can check it out at the top right corner there, and while some people commented that the frame rate isn't exactly consistent, I'd argue that that is because I did not enable the performance mode. You see, the new Game Turbo did get an update, and it includes a new interface and also a few new features. One of it is the performance mode that also allows you to monitor the FPS as well, but unfortunately it is not a floating widget, so yeah, you cannot monitor while playing the game. Other than the Game Turbo update, Xiaomi also did a few minor changes to the software, and for this phone in particular, it is powered by MIUI version 13.0.2, and we also have something new called Get Apps. This is essentially Xiaomi's own app store, and it also doubles as a system app updater, much like Samsung and their Galaxy Store. I don't know why Xiaomi decided that this is a good time to launch their own app store, but I don't really mind because it opens up some possibility for Xiaomi to collaborate with some other games or apps so that they can get their own exclusive deals from those developers as well. That aside, Xiaomi also promised a total of 3 generations of Android OS upgrades and 4 years of security patches for the entire Xiaomi 12T series. That is just good news for everyone. But then Xiaomi also announced a new feature for the Xiaomi 12T Pro called the Pro Cut tool. Xiaomi kept showing off and talking about this feature, but they didn't tell anyone how to actually use this feature. On that night when they were having the live stream and talk about the Xiaomi 12T Pro, we were actually busily hammering on our 12T Pro with our friends from Singapore just to find out where the Pro Cut feature is located. And after messing around for a very long time, I eventually found out. The Pro Cut feature is kind of hidden. You need to take the picture in Ultra HD mode, so that means either 50 megapixel or 200 megapixel mode, and then head into the gallery, tap on that image, and then you will see that icon appear at the bottom there. You have to tap on that icon, and then it will automatically generate those images for you. Basically, Pro Cut identifies which part of the image is your subject and then tries to generate a few different crop versions of that image for you. The result is pretty hit and miss, but seriously, the communication in terms of the UI could have been a lot better. I guess some things just never changed with MIUI because everything else about MIUI remains the same, like what we've talked previously, and the settings menu is still a mess, and the screen timeout option is not under the display menu, it's actually under the lock screen menu. Now it is time to talk about the cameras. The Xiaomi 12T Pro has a total of 3 cameras at the back here, but we are only going to focus about the main 200 megapixel sensor camera. I just want to thank Xiaomi for including a proper OIS this time because I was genuinely surprised since you guys removed it in the 11T Pro from last year and replaced it with EIS. I complained a lot, and now the 12T Pro has a proper OIS system. Good job, thanks for listening. But back to the picture quality of this phone. This is going to be kind of tough to talk because I am going to split the picture sample into a total of 3 groups. So the first one is in the default 12.5 megapixel mode. Second group is 50 megapixel, and third group is 200 megapixel. So if we only take a look at all the pictures taken in 12.5 megapixel mode, then yeah, the pictures, they turn out real good. Details, colors, they are fantastic. And the white balance is also very good. The outdoor pictures might look a bit dull here, but I don't blame the camera system because it was raining heavily over the past few days and it was super gloomy. And now we need to talk about the pictures in groups 2 and 3. Why do you shoot pictures at a high resolution then? Well, in some cases, like printing a humongous image, then you would want to capture the image in high resolution so you can print it at a high PPI or pixels per inch. But that is only the technical side. Before we talk about the resolution, the camera also needs to capture the image with relative high amount of details so that you can print it out and look good. So how does the detail look when capturing at 50 megapixel and 200 megapixel mode? Well, we have to zoom in and see. Let's say for this flower stamen, the zoom in view of the 12.5 megapixel starts to look a lot jaggier, but in the 50 megapixel mode, the pictures look a lot better. And at this view, the 50 megapixel is actually quite sufficient, but if we use the 200 megapixel picture, we can zoom in a lot better, and then we can even see the anther of the flower. The details aren't exactly as clear as a microscope, but we can clearly see that it's the plant's anther, so that's quite impressive. For busy scenic shots like this, if we want to zoom in, then the 12.5 megapixel picture is pretty much unusable because you can't distinguish the details of the leaves because it just looks like a clump of green color. But when we switch to the 50 megapixel mode, it looks a lot better. But it will still look more or less the same as the 200 megapixel version because I just guess there's a limitation when it comes to megapixel counts over the distance. But when I took a picture of some insect using the 200 megapixel mode, I can zoom in to the point that I can see the individual legs and all of those tiny little hair-like structures on the leg. And I just find that to be amazing. I also took a lot more 200 megapixel modes that I'm just gonna show you in this montage here. And it's gonna be real difficult to edit this video because those 200 megapixel pictures will literally choke Premiere Pro to the point that it doesn't respond to any button presses. Then I also took some night shots using the 50 and 200 megapixel modes, and I immediately realized that the dynamic range is not as good as the top of the Twin Towers here is overexposed. But at 200 megapixel mode, I can actually see and count the individual window pane in the building. And if we switch back to 12.5 megapixel mode and enable night mode, then yeah, the Twin Towers look a lot better and the exposure is also very balanced. One thing that I do want to highlight is that this 200 megapixel mode cannot be used in manual mode or pro mode if you want to call it that way. Yeah, we can only enable 50 megapixel in the pro mode, which I think is quite a bummer. So Xiaomi, please add the option to enable 200 megapixel mode with manual mode, then we can surely take some mind-blowing pictures using this sensor. So then, should you take your pictures in 50 or 200 megapixels then? I'll just say this, if you're gonna upload the entire image to social media, then you definitely wouldn't realize any difference, so don't do that. Okay then, what about the two other cameras? The ultra-wide angle camera is a very basic one, picture quality is decent, but for this scene in particular, the white balance is just completely off. And then for the 2 megapixel macro camera, it is also completely useless. Seriously, either upgrade it to a 5 megapixel sensor with an autofocusing camera lens or just don't include it at all. Because currently you can take pictures using the 50 megapixel mode and then crop it in and it will look a lot better than that 2 megapixel macro camera. Imagine this, like the 200 megapixel picture of the insect that I showed you earlier. You can't get that close to take a picture of that insect. It will just fly away. So I have to use the 200 megapixel mode, take a picture further away and then zoom it in. You get the idea? And with those 6 points out of the way, I still have a few more things to mention about the Xiaomi 12T Pro. The USB Type-C port at the bottom of this phone is still a USB 2.0 port, so it will take forever to transfer those 200 megapixel pictures and your 4K 60fps videos. Since it is using a USB 2.0 port, that means this phone cannot output HDMI signal over USB-C. And then there's also no micro SD card slot, so we are stuck with the internal storage only, which might be a problem since those 200 megapixel pics and 4K 60fps videos are taking lots of storage and yet it takes forever to transfer them out. So in conclusion then, we'll talk about the price first. In Malaysia, it is available in two variants. The 8GB RAM version starts at 2,699 and the 12GB RAM version is at 2,999 ringgit. Both variants come with 256 gigs of storage, and I would just tell you to get the 8 gigs of RAM version because we have already explained in another video, which you can watch here at the top right corner there. Anything more than 8 gigs of RAM is gonna be quite underutilized. And then finally, do I recommend you getting the Xiaomi 12T Pro? I'd actually say yes. If you play games on your phone, then this phone is going to be the cheapest phone available that you can buy today that is using the latest Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset. And if you're interested to use that 200 megapixel camera sensor, then just make sure you know what you're getting into because yeah, different people will have different usage when it comes to this kind of sensor. The colors and details look pretty good and comparable with other smartphones of this range, but the biggest advantage is the ability to take it in higher resolution so you can zoom it in. I'd say that this phone is also rather good for videography because of that proper OIS system and 4K 60fps recording, but like what we mentioned earlier, transferring those files out is gonna be a pain because of its USB 2.0 port. So yeah, if this phone suits your usage, then go on ahead and buy it. I highly recommend it, especially for gaming. Camera system, make sure you know what you're getting into. So that's it. That's all we have to share with you about this phone. And if you have any other additional questions, leave them down in the comment section below. Remember to subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next video.